Microsoft Flight Sim 2024 is the follow-up to the runaway success story of Microsoft Flight Sim 2020, a game that landed in a weird time for the world, struck a chord for people wanting to explore the globe from the comfort of their homes. It's had a much talked about difficult launch, a new streaming heavy design coupled with server problems left many players feeling understandably frustrated. So a couple weeks after launch, where are we now for both seasoned sim pilots, but also the multitude of gamers who all enjoy what this unique title delivers? Now LCTR, if you're a fan of games like this, then please do tap the subscription button, and if you enjoyed the video, the old thumb button too. I cover a variety of mainly FPS and sim titles. Your support is very much appreciated. And before we start, in my normal full disclosure way, I want to say that Xbox gave me the code for this game so I could make videos about it, just like this one. Oh, and if you want to skip around in the video, then there are timestamps for each section. MSFS 2020 holds a special place in my heart. The first game to really bridge both the flight simulator and gaming communities, providing enough to each group to become loved by many. So many, in fact, that 4 years later we now have its successor. It was my relaxing game, which might come as a surprise to some, especially when looking at the sheer cliff of buttons, controls and dials inside some cockpits. But 2020 walked a line where you got from it what you wanted. If you want something relaxing, sightseeing some of the wonders of the world, want to cruise around the clouds for an hour with a TV show or podcast, sure, no problem. You don't even need some complex sim-rigged joystick setup. It's very flyable with an Xbox controller. But then if I want that bit of my brain that likes the technical authenticity of a sim, then we can really do all the button pressing and checklists to almost convince myself that I might be good at the real thing too. When I'm in the mood to learn, then becoming accomplished at operating something as complex as a modern jet is thoroughly enjoyable. So Microsoft Flight Sim 2024 had a lot to live up to. The first introduction wasn't an auspicious start. Massive server issues meant that many people who'd bought the game couldn't play for days. Some stuck on loading screens, or others finding technical issues even if they could manage to load in. The install size of Flight Sim 2024 is much smaller than it was in 2020, relying on streaming data to fill those gaps. This of course means that when the servers aren't working as hoped, the shortfall is felt even worse than normal. As I type this many days after launch, it's still not 100%. It is much better than it was. I was stuck on loading for hours on launch day, but even now I can fail to load into a mission. It just stops downloading data and I need to restart the game. Also, some assets can load slowly, which leaves ugly, low-resolution textures, or sometimes not load in at all. I seem to have a persistent issue where sound assets appear not to be downloaded, and I'm left with an ambient-only noise. No sound comes from the aircraft's engine. For me, though, it's lowered to the levels of annoyance over actually blocking my enjoyment of the game. It's hard to know how much of these issues are teething issues that you might see from a new title, and which are the product of server issues. I can have flights of real beauty, genuine amazement at how modern games can look. The new graphical enhancements, particularly the lighting and cloud scattering, looks amazing with the scenery. Yet then I can fly in, say, Alaska and find that the ground texture only allows me to see roads a couple of 100 yards ahead, or cities with their 3D photogrammetry data. They should look amazing and accurate to real-life buildings, yet the data looks sort of low resolution and fractured. Is that a quality issue with the world data, a bug, or a streaming issue with the servers? I don't know. I guess I hope it's the servers, as that feels like it could be sorted sooner. But it leads to the feeling of variable quality. The highs and lows are somewhat unpredictable. There are other issues that are clearly not server related though. Things like the menu design feels somehow less solid than before, like it's loading the individual elements of the menu whenever you open it, and this can cause a significant lag spike in the game, big enough to affect the physics of the game and cause the aircraft to behave erratically. There's just so many rough edges that exist in the game too, interaction points that are, ironically, tough to interact with, even though your pointer is clearly on them. Some aircraft spawn in locations on some airports that put that aircraft on the roof of buildings, and I could go on. I'm hoping this all improves with time. I know it can do. It's just that the contrast between the polish that Flight Sim 2020 had in the 4 years since launch and the new 2024 title is sometimes stark to see. And if you did have a bad launch, then let me know in the comments if things are better for you now as well. I'm interested to know whether the improvements that I've seen are happening for everyone. There are many more gameplay elements to Microsoft Flight Sim 2024 though. There's a notable effort to gamify the sim for players looking for that kind of experience. And I think that's fair. I did see many people say that they felt that 2020 could be kind of aimless, especially if you came from a traditional gaming background. It's a beautiful sandbox, but it required people to find their own way. I did find myself in that camp initially. It's a huge world, many planes, so what do you do with that sort of blank page paralysis? Well, I turned to setting myself goals. A world trip in stages was my first. I basically planned out each leg for the length of time that I wanted to play, and I have to say, I learned a lot. It took me to places that I probably wouldn't have picked otherwise. In Flight Sim 2024, we have progression through the new career system. This is a curated path of learning new flight skills and taking tests to unlock missions in the world, from aircraft handling, navigation, and even pre-flight preparations. But in fact, the pre-flight checks that happen are the first for the sim. It's a first-person walk-around that adds more to the experience than I initially gave it credit for. It's not just a game function of moving around the aircraft. For me, it was a feeling of scale that wasn't present in Microsoft Flight Sim 2020. Yes, the world felt huge, but the planes themselves often felt physically similar when you just loaded into the cockpit. It's tough to convey the different scales of aircraft when they often boil down to, it's a window on a computer screen. In comparison, walking around before taking off really sells that scale. Some light aircraft are tiny, like small two-seater cars. Jumbo jets, airliners, and other freight titans tower over you. And even walking past the landing gear lets you appreciate the almost human-sized wheels and tires. The missions you get after qualifying for the initial pilot's license are simple tours of the area around the airfield that you picked at the start. They certainly give goals for those people who like that sort of thing in their flight sim. You're marked with things like how well you manage your speed, distance to the sites the passengers wanted to see, while of course being monitored for your airmanship skills. I found the contrast to the sandbox free flight mode to be different enough to enjoy the change, and the game certainly feels richer for the new career mode. I haven't progressed very far into the unlockable trees of certifications. It looks like there's many hours of gameplay on offer, and if you're like me, you'll be running some of those tutorials over and over, particularly on the navigation side, which apparently I'm not very good at. If I had to complain, I would say that I would very much like to see some of these missions available in the open world too, in free flight mode. If you want to do firefighting or search and rescue missions, and you can't without unlocking them in the career, and I think at the very least there should be a sandbox mode for the career section too, for people who don't want to go through the full progression mechanics. Oh, also, the AI voices that are given to the passengers you move around is really not up to par at all. There's weird inflections and odd pacing to much of what they say. It's kind of like how I'd imagine ferrying around aliens who are trying to pass off as humans and not doing a very good job. The actual flight handling has had notable improvements in Microsoft Flight Sim 2024 over its predecessor 2020. Before, there was sort of a springy lack of weight to many things in the previous game, from taxiing aircraft that appear to have not much inertia or momentum. So actually taking off became less gradual, and yet there was a sort of spring off the runway feeling that undermined the experience. All of that is improved in Microsoft Flight Sim 2024. I don't know how much that's down to a new physics system, but I do know that they now use a computational fluid dynamics, or CFD, approach to simulating how the air will move around the aircraft. It's the sort of approach shared by real aircraft and racing car design. It even takes into account things like rotating propellers to simulate the so-called prop wash air movement that is generated by that spinning, and how that affects the rest of the aircraft. They actually have a visualization mode in-game where you can see the system in action. Performance for me is in a semi-comparable place, well, compared to Microsoft Flight Sim 2020. That is not terrific, but workable, and in fact there are some improvements. I'm using a 5900X CPU with a 3070 GPU, so basically 4-year-old hardware. I like some visual eye candy, so I picked the medium profile and enable some specific options like clouds up to ultra, and I raise the terrain and object levels up a bit. If I'm sitting at the 40 to 60 FPS range, that's pretty playable for me. I could get more if I used DLSS, but I actually prefer the crispness of the native resolution, and I'm willing to make that trade. But I have had moments of unexplained performance loss, down to 7 or 10 FPS, that recovers after time, which is odd and frustrating when it happens. On the upside, my CPU has 12 cores. Microsoft Flight Sim 2024 seems to use them more than the previous 2020 ever did. I don't know if it's related, but in places where performance was previously the poorest, such as New York City with all the dense building data, while 2024 fares better, it doesn't drop in performance anywhere near as much. And if you have newer PC hardware, then let me know how things are running for you in the comments. I'm seeing the recently announced CPUs and wondering how much improvement I might see with them. I mentioned before that Microsoft Flight Sim 2024 had different architecture than Flight Sim 2020. It relies much more on data streamed to your computer over having large amounts installed to your local drives. Anecdotally, I think with all my third-party aircraft and optional installs for Flight Sim 2020, that install size is currently around 460 gigabytes, which is obviously huge. So the change in Flight Sim 2024, of all that being around the sort of 20 to 30 gigabytes, is a huge improvement. There are other benefits too, primarily that the data being streamed can always be up to date. Previously, when they released a world update, it required a large download to update the game, allowing you to see the improved visuals that have been added to that area of the globe. Now that doesn't need to happen, as only the servers that stream the data need to be updated. But of course it does mean that Flight Sim 2024 does transfer more data while you play. To get an idea of how much, I tracked how much data was being moved when I loaded into the so-called Discovery flight of New York City, a location that I hadn't been to in the sim, so somewhere that it didn't have a chance to cache locally on my SSD. You can see on screen the graph of data usage over time. In total, it downloaded just under 980 megabytes, so pretty much 1 gigabyte of data for this historically dense area for the sim. And if there's interest on how that compares to other areas, I might do a follow-up video, but it shows that people who are unlucky enough to be on data caps for their internet usage need to be mindful about how much data the game is using. There is an option in the settings for so-called rolling cache. This is a pool of data that the game keeps once downloaded, so if it's needed again, it can access quickly from the drive over needing to re-download. The default is 16 gigabytes, but you can set it higher if you wish to give the game more drive space and allow it to store more data. Whether flying repeatedly in the same area so as to maximize how often the sim can use the rolling cache over new downloaded data would actually mitigate much of the general downloading is not currently known, and I'd probably need to do more testing. There's no doubting the sticker price for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. From my perspective, the cost is pretty high. In the UK, the base price is £69.99, with 3 escalating options that top out at an eye-watering £199.99. It's for this reason that I would recommend you look at the Xbox Game Pass subscription route as well. In the UK, that is £9.99 per month, and gets you access to the standard tier of Flight Sim 2024, and you may actually be eligible for a free or low-cost trial as well. This obviously gets you access to a variety of other games too, Stalker 2, the latest Call of Duty, the Forza driving series, and many others. It does get more difficult if you want access to specific aircraft that are only available in the higher tiers of Flight Sim 2024 though. At the moment, there's no way to buy specific access to individual planes. The market is still not functional. However, Jörg Newman, head of Microsoft Flight Simulator, said in a stream that they intend to offer that in the future, although we don't actually have any specific pricing on that. I would say that previously, in 2020, they allowed you to upgrade the tier of game you owned, but not buy specific planes, so that is an improvement. Oh, and there is a tracking link in the description if you want to check out the game on Steam. It's not like an affiliate link where I get paid or anything like that, but obviously it makes me look good if the link is used. So if you do want to check it out on Steam, and if you use the link, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. For non-sim players looking to take to the skies, then there comes a moment of realization that perhaps they need some sort of controller to best pilot their dream. First off, I know there are some keyboard and mouse options, but I'd recommend against really trying to use those for actual flight controls. For moving your view and clicking on things in the cockpit, they're great, but actually controlling things like aircraft pitch and roll, not so much. You don't need a massive sim station either. I've been playing for years with a Thrustmaster joystick and a throttle setup that I paid, I think, about £100 for. But actually, I find that an Xbox controller itself is very usable too. This is perhaps unsurprising, given that the game itself is available on Xbox consoles. I find that if I'm not in the mood to get my stick and throttle sort of out and plugged in and set up, then I can just relax with a controller, and it's a good experience. One other area that I would recommend looking into is head tracking. It might seem like a lot, but I was shocked at how much more immersive it makes the whole experience. Real flying can be so much about looking outside the aircraft, and having that be as easy in-game as moving your head over having to use like a joystick or a mouse to adjust your view is a huge bonus. It doesn't have to be an expensive setup, though of course it can be if you want, but there are a number of free options that use webcams to track head movement. I've even seen some that use phone cameras to do the same. It really gives enough of that immersion and enhanced feeling of freedom in the game that I'd really recommend at least checking out the options if you find yourself playing more and more. Whether Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 is worth playing at the moment depends a lot on how much the bugs and other issues will spoil your enjoyment. For those paying almost £70 to almost £200, it might sour that experience, so perhaps for those who want to check it out now, then the Game Pass might be a better option. But know that past those rough edges, there is much to enjoy about Microsoft Flight Sim 2024. The world has taken on even more life and wonder with improved spectacle. There's more game to enjoy within your career mode's mix of progression and challenge, and skills to learn along the way, like actually how to navigate in an aircraft. For those MilSim fans who would prefer more military aircraft in the sim, then there are other options from developers who've made a multitude of past and present planes and helicopters. Spitfires, F-35s, they're all available. When the marketplace opens, you can see many of the options, but there are a number of third-party sites, some of them offering free options. I said that Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 was my relaxing game, and honestly, since the large server issues of 2024 have quietened down, that has now become my go-to game for listening to music, podcasts, or watching Twitch streams. I know there are other aircraft sims on the market, and I've tried many of them. They all offer something unique, but for me, the call of the whole world at your fingertips that the reborn Microsoft Flight Sim series offers is the magic that really elevates this game. To see that side of the game improve, to have real moments of wonder at what I'm looking at, is a really intoxicating experience that I don't know where else to find. Yes, this really is the start of the journey for Microsoft Flight Sim 2024. The bumps and turbulence of takeoff have been significant, but with care I'm hoping that the game is heading for smoother times and improvements along the way. I'm certainly going to be along for the ride. But what do you think of Microsoft Flight Sim 2024? Are you a fan of the series already? Maybe you're new to it entirely. Let me know all your powerful thoughts and feelings below by leaving a comment right now. Like always, I'll be reading every single one of them. If you did enjoy this video, please tap the thumb up button and the sub button. It supports the channel and helps me continue to make videos in the future, while also telling you when the new ones are out. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care.